Top 10 Business Rivalries. There is no doubt business and competition goes hand in hand. Nonetheless, there are certain times two companies become entangled in business feuds, and these divide customers as much as the products themselves. Before we get started with this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell button to stay in control of our exciting updates. From the cola wars to the clash between long-distance transporters, we keep a tab on the top 10 business feuds in history. Be sure you stay tuned for number 1, as this business rivalry guarantees a shocking revelation. Coke versus Pepsi. Competition, just like love, can make one do irrational things. How else can the tale of Coke's catastrophic effort to twist its legendary formula and introduce new Coke, a sweeter variant on the classic billion-dollar recipe, be told? The cola battle has lasted more than 100 years. When Coca-Cola was first introduced in 1886, Pepsi came on board almost immediately, which was around 1898. The most dishonorable era of conflict came in the 1970s and 1980s, when Pepsi swiftly gained ground through its mind-blowing Pepsi Challenge ad campaign that brought out blind taste tests. The Pepsi Challenge also hard-pressed Coca-Cola into what seemed to be a PR horror show. This indeed was a kickoff for their new debatable New Coke in 1985. Anyway, the hostile response that followed this step and a rapid relaunch of Coca-Cola Classic enticed a vast crowd. However, it ended up bolstering Coke's #1 spot in the cola market, where it still is today. Marvel Comics versus DC Comics. In 1996, opposing comic companies DC, Detective Comics, and Marvel issued a joint series in which each originator's characters engaged in a series of duels. Elektra throws Catwoman off a building. Aquaman gets a whale to defeat Namor. With every battle, the intensity of the feud appeared to drive the publishers farther apart. However, DC and Marvel were not about to stop, as they had other ideas. For instance, in the final story, characters from both worlds joined forces. In some other cases, they even merged identities, as Wolverine and Batman became Dark Claw just to save the day. Thankfully, the series ended on a conciliatory note, and the two turned from rivals to partners. Undeniably, despite the superhero firepower being created, the rivalry between DC and Marvel has in most times been a civil one. Marvel even calls DC distinguished competition. Funny, but that is how polite the rivalry between the two is. Both companies apparently have come to accept the importance of having a well-meaning competition and have also benefited from Hollywood's interest in bringing their characters to the big screen. McDonald's versus Burger King. The rivalry between McDonald's and Burger King most times comes down to one thing: the hamburger. The battle between these two hung on which company's burger was more convenient, very affordable, better tasting. There is no secret that there is no love lost between these two fast food titans. These giants have spent large sums of money trying to outshine each other in their advertising for so many decades. Burger King caught the public's admiration with its silly Whopper, that is a Big Mac box, billboards early in the 2000s that had a more gigantic burger trying to fit in its rival's box on display. Some guts, I must admit, but that is how far the feud went. Burger King has even gone ahead to use Ronald McDonald in some TV adverts, presenting while he was sneaking into one of its branches. Nonetheless, McDonald's was not terrified to hit back. Their own advert features a road sign with a ridiculously long list of directions to the nearest Burger King in a 2016 advert, and with the message, "McDonald's is closer to you." Ford versus GM. General Motors, back in Motor City, opened its doors in 1912 to begin the production of cars, and this was just miles from the entrepreneur Henry Ford's stomping dregs. Back then, Ford, kept afloat by the success of the Model T, was #1 in the industry's innovation. It brought cars to the masses by keeping costs very low and affordable. For instance, in 2015's value of dollars, Ford cars sold for roughly $21,700. By 1927, Ford had managed to sell over 15 million Model Ts, repeatedly changing American culture by hosting young people to the fairy tale freedom of the open road. All the while, GM was progressively gaining market share. In 1931, the younger competitor overthrew Ford as the world's leading car manufacturer, and even managed to maintain the dominance for a good 8 decades. Nike versus Reebok. Did you know that the clash between Reebok and Nike has been there for over 3 decades? These were the two marquees who initiated celebrity athlete culture that has continued even until today. The very first rival started when Reebok started making aerobic shoes for women, and on the other hand, Nike was engaged in satisfying male customers. Reebok then overtook Nike in 1987, as the product began to tussle hard to catch up in the following years. Later, Nike went ahead to call Andre Agassi, Tiger Woods, Pete Sampras, and Michael Jordan as their brand ambassadors. Reebok reacted to it in a very short time by signing Shaquille O'Neal, who initially came to fame by wearing a Nike jacket, which had much later let down Nike executives. That sure was a tremendous blow in the right direction, don't you agree? UPS versus FedEx. This logistics face-off is all about automobiles and planes. FedEx controls the world's largest fleet of all cargo airplanes, with up to 700 and counting, while UPS leads in earth vehicles. UPS has a fleet of over 100,000 delivery trucks under its control. Those fleets are the foot soldiers in the rising e-commerce market, which now represents up to 7% of U.S. retail sales. Each day, the two competitors move about 28 million packages. Anyway, for UPS, handling the last mile of package delivery, the disreputably costly and challenging logistics problem, has become the company's fundamental strength. Adidas versus Puma. It may interest you to learn that two brothers were at the center of one of the most prominent rivalries in sport, and this was the brand feud between shoemakers Puma and Adidas. Obviously, it all began so peacefully when the young Adi Dassler and his older brother Rudolf started a footwear business together in Germany in the 1920s. Most people may not also know these brothers had been working out of their mother's laundry room long before the innovation. However, the brothers fell out when the shoe business boomed, and the pressures that came with getting clients for a fresh brand grew during the Second World War. The brothers eventually went their separate ways, but splitting all they had made and acquired during the course of the business into two. Later on, Rudolf launched Puma, while Adi launched Adidas, on various sides of the river in their hometown, Herzogenaurach. A fundraising football match between their employees in 2009 was their first joint activity since they split back in the 1940s. Airbus versus Boeing. A century back, right on a beach in Florida, the world's very first commercial flight took to the skies, with just one person as its passenger. It is interesting to note that this passenger paid the equivalent of about $10,000 in today's dollar value. Today, the $160 billion airline industry sells nothing less than 3 billion tickets every year. It is noteworthy to acknowledge that according to The Guardian, China is in the middle of building about 70 new airports and growing 100 existing ones. Anyway, the clash of the aircraft monster started way back in the 1980s when the European manufacturer Airbus started moving in onto the US firm Boeing's market. Together with their various governments, both sides have since accused the other of getting unfair state subsidies and have gone as far as taking their case to the World Trade Organization. The bitter clash became one of the longest and most overpriced in the trade body's history. The dispute has spilled over into publicity as well, with Airbus giving its rival's plane a Pinocchio-style nose and an image unconstrained back in 2012. The two sides are continuously at each other's throats. However, Boeing's most considerable concern at the moment lies in the worldwide ban of its 737 MAX fleet after two new airplanes successively crashed within 5 months in 2019. Hasbro versus Mattel. When Barbie and Mr. Potato Head duke it out, you just don't want to be in the room. Those legendary American toys are the creation of Hasbro and Mattel, the country's chief toy manufacturers. They have even managed to dominate these $18 billion business for decades. Mattel became famous in the 1960s with Barbie's launch, but later lost prominence to toys like Hasbro's Transformers action figures. And then in 1996, Hasbro discouraged Mattel's $5.2 billion acquisition offer, preparing the ground for an unending fight between them. In present times, as parents have probed the gender roles implied in many outdated toys and children have drifted down to other games found on the screens, the clash between these two have managed to remain relevant. In some other cases, their clients have wondered if their products have been in playrooms for years, and at different times, new releases have strengthened opinions that the aging companies are just out of touch. AT&T versus MCI. Today's text-happy tweens are just too young to think of MCI. Still, they owe that company a debt of appreciation for its role in breaking up AT&T's long overdue domineering of the telecommunications industry. It is no secret that MCI sued AT&T in 1974, eventually winning $1.8 billion in damages and causing the disassembly of AT&T's monopoly. In the following year, carriers started to compete on price and thus making long-distance calls progressively more affordable. And as the industry forces at work become more competitive, improvements in wireless technologies and fiber optic cables started to change how we accessed information and communicated. And then in the 1990s, MCI encountered a massive setback after its fusion with WorldCom. Anyways, the company leaders altered the fact to the tune of $11 billion. And this, folks, was the second largest bookkeeping scam in history. So there you have it, guys, the top 10 business rivalries in history. Which of these feuds do you believe is still very noticeable to date? Kindly share your observations, thoughts, and suggestions in the comment section below. If this video was insightful, don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell button to be notified whenever we upload videos like this one. That's it for me, guys. Don't forget to stay classy and safe. I will see you in the next video.